So our final panel of the day is the business of policy. So we've spent a lot of the day talking about public policies to support the growth of our industry. I thought it would be really compelling to have a group of business leaders across the diverse life sciences sector to talk about the diverse policies across government that impact the way that they do business. And so moderating this session will be our very own Mark Smithyes. Mark is the chairman of the LSO board, and he is also the president of Labtician Théa here in Canada. So please join me in welcoming Mark to the podium, and please welcome our panelists.
Thank you, Jason. You guys are in for a real treat, and you're a very lucky group. The crowd is thinned out a little bit, and the unlucky ones are not here. So consider yourself very fortunate. This is really an exciting time in life sciences. I have to tell you that I am incredibly optimistic. It was such an inspiring set of panels. I think my favorite part was when John Marshall, the ADM, said that life sciences was a huge priority because we have a huge competitive advantage. I thought that was, for me, a really important, an important moment. We will have reached an incredible milestone when I hear the Premier of the province saying that. And I think as I look forward, that would be a fine, talking about balanced scorecard, that would be a fine measure of success for LSO and for us as a sector more broadly to have that happen. Meantime, we have a great deal of work to do because as we know from startups to multinationals, governments play an important role in creating a competitive business environment for Ontario and life sciences companies in terms of procurement, access to capital, talent, and investment attraction. We have an outstanding panel this afternoon to help us discuss this. I would like to introduce them right now. Carly Martin, at your far left, is Director of Stakeholder Outreach for eSight. She is Director at an Ontario company with a breakthrough medical device that enables the legally blind to actually see. And you may have seen that Time magazine named this one of the 25 greatest inventions of 2017. Carly is, I think that deserves a round of applause, yes?
On behalf of eSight, thank you.
Carly is responsible for the development and management of eSight's relationship with key stakeholders, including government, educational institutions, associations, and patient groups. So thank you for joining us, Carly. We then have William Rowe, who is President and CEO and co-founder of Nutrasource Pharmaceuticals and Nutraceutical Services. William co-founded Nutrasource with Dr. Bruce Holub in May 2002 with the intent to market a novel diagnostic test called the Omega Score. Since then, Nutrasource has grown to become a world leader in servicing the global health products industry in clinical, regulatory, analytical, and bioanalytical services, as well as the omega-3 and GMO product certification programs. He has also received, has been nominated for the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year twice as lead of Nutrasource to place on the Profit 500 list of Canada's fastest growing companies over the last 5 years. Welcome, William. Next, we have Har Grover, Chairman and CEO of Scientus Pharma. Har is an entrepreneur, investor, senior executive, and strategist with over 30 years experience in healthcare, life sciences, and technology. He's worked with growth companies at all stages, from startup to commercialization to going public and growing through the $1 billion revenue mark. Most impressive. He's helped companies enter new markets, both Canada and internationally, and organically through M&A, strategic alliances, and joint ventures. Welcome, Har. And finally, Alok Kanti, President and CEO of Bayer. In his role, he is responsible for the direct management of the Canadian healthcare pharmaceuticals business and has oversight over all of Bayer's businesses in Canada. While he's been here for 3 years, I think. Yeah. He actually first started his career, he's been in Canada for 3 years, but first started his career as an international management trainee with more than 20 years experience in several key positions within the global Bayer organization. So it's great to have him back, and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to, so we'll do it a similar way as the other panels. We'll give each panelist a few minutes to speak broadly about the topic. And then I think I'd like to get a little bit more audience participation. It is the last panel. It's, getting on in the day. So I will certainly ask questions, but in between my questions, I am going to go to the audience and pull some questions out. So please start thinking immediately of what questions you have for this august group. The topic we wanted to discuss today was how public policy influences life sciences companies of different types across our industry, and how government and the private sector can work effectively to benefit the sector as a whole. Carly, can I ask you to start us off on that topic, and if you'd like to set a little bit of context as to eSight and where you fit into the scheme of things, that would
Absolutely. My goal, I thought I would use my moment of time here to talk a little bit about eSight and what it is, the benefits to being in Ontario and the support that we received, so that context around government. I will talk into this, I do promise you. And otherwise, talk a bit about some of the constraints and the challenges that we're facing, but yet why we're also optimistic that we can work together to address some of those items. So eSight, eyewear, Ontario innovation. We make this amazing wearable device, electronic glasses that enable someone who is low vision or legally blind to actually see. I hope that the Time article lends a little bit of credibility, because otherwise it does sound a little incredulous. I do realize, having been in the office though and seeing the experiences day in and day out, whether it's colleagues or new people who are trying eSight for the first time, it really is remarkable. So we're providing functional sight in that central field of vision. They look like electronic glasses. They truly do work. So eSight is the only clinically validated wearable medical device in existence that enables someone to have that experience, to actually see and be truly independent, walking independently, working independently at work, in school. It opens up opportunities for the person that it works for. If it's the right tool for them, if it's the one that they want, if it helps them achieve their goals, it can be life-changing. Headquartered in Toronto with manufacturing and R&D in Ottawa, eSight is a proud Ontario company through and through, holding over 40 granted and applied for patents. eSight is a Class 1 medical device, now available in 42 countries and counting. We had a pretty big jump up once we got CE mark and had our international expansion start up in about June. Most recently, I believe, I think we're done in India. I think we've passed that hurdle there. So very, very exciting time for the company. And so I think it's fair to say that eSight has the makings of a potential Ontario-made global success story, export potential, supporting the right population, access to talent here, remarkable story. And we didn't get here overnight, and we didn't get here alone. We've taken full advantage of our proximity to academic and medical expertise. Our office is along University Rowe. The manufacturing R&D in Ottawa has made full access to the universities and support systems there as well. Along our journey to commercialization, eSight has received funding from OCE, grants from IRAP, investments from Mars, and loans from FedDev. Our entry to Europe was supported by Can Export. We hire new grads through BioTalent, which I believe is a sponsor, and maybe they're here today. Highly recommend. And certainly, as a company that makes a device that enables someone to stay in the workplace or to be used in the workplace, we make use of the Opportunities Fund to maintain our commitment to hire individuals who have a disability. And today we can proudly say that approximately 20%, I think it's higher right now, actually wear eSight in the office. And that ranges from roles in human resource and recruitment, to sales, to strategic partnership development, IT training. So it's quite remarkable. 9, 8 hours, I shouldn't say 9, 8 hours a day in front of a, never 9, 8 hours a day in front of a computer screen. We use Salesforce. So if anyone has any experience with low vision, Salesforce is blue and white text, horrible text for someone who has low vision. Using eSight, our colleagues are able to use that technology and that service, that platform, and are using it. So it's a true testament to the technology if you can use Salesforce with eSight. But all of that support has been important. It's helped us, the company, get where today is. But we do have this one persistent challenge. And I decided to bring this up knowing that, representing the startups in the room, and adoption here at home is not a unique challenge to eSight. And like any new technology, price starts high. eSight's current price is beyond the means of most legally blind individuals, given their low socioeconomic status and 70% unemployment rate. So we do reach out to private and public sector organizations. We use our market insights, data, live demonstrations to demonstrate the benefit of the technology and providing it to their employees, to their students, to their members, to their constituents. And we're having these discussions in Canada, in the US, in Europe, notably with the US Veterans Administration, which actually provides care to approximately 200,000 blind or low vision veterans. So huge market for us, huge demand, and we certainly have a lot of consumers who are paying out of pocket in that market. But moving the needle when it comes to adoption and payment, the big question that comes back to us every single time, and it happened recently again, was, if eSight is so good, why hasn't your government adopted it? Why isn't it available to your population? And the hit to our credibility will become more apparent as we continue to expand into these markets. It's feedback that we're receiving in Europe from our distributors. And we probably will have adoption outside of Canada before we have it at home. And our experience isn't unique. And because of public policy interventions and a willingness to address these challenges, today there are funds, there are resources, and there are personnel dedicated to addressing many of the barriers that do impede adoption. It's an exciting time. There's OCHAS, eSight. They're doing tremendous, wonderful work. Really excited about what we see coming out of it. There's a lot of buzz, and deservingly so. So our advice and what I would want to talk about is, how do we grow these programs? How do we scale them, add new programs, new funds, expand into other areas of life sciences, make this available to our education institutions, respond to industry and patient feedback. If there's a particular government program that is resistant to innovation, tackle it, evaluate it, put it on the agenda, talk to the stakeholders who are providing you with that feedback. If we want Ontario to benefit from the innovations that this ecosystem is developing, if we want to sustain this growth and make Ontario a #1 destination for life science investment, we need to find additional ways to trial and adopt these innovations at home.
Thank you.
More than a little context.
No, that was great. No, thank you. And it certainly created a bunch of questions in my mind, and I'm sure yours. And I want to come back. We're going to go to William next, but I want to come back and explore want to explore those roadblocks and what would have sped up adoption. Where are you on that adoption? What's stopping you? We'll come back and explore that, though, because that, to my mind, is the crux of a really important issue. So, William?
Thanks, Mark. So William Rowe, President and CEO of Nutrasource, a company, Ontario-based company as well, founded out of Guelph, Ontario. Over the past 15 years, have grown to 4 locations in 3 countries, roughly 100 staff, but we're a service provider to the global health products industry. And essentially, we tried to boil things down and simplify things in terms of our message, because I was getting really sick at family reunions and family barbecues trying to explain what the heck we did and what clinical trials are and RCTs and medical food versus pharmaceutical in the US and these sort of things. So I said, everybody, from now on, you tell them when they ask, we are in the claims substantiation business. That's essentially what we do. So companies from all shapes and sizes, from a single SKU entrepreneur with a concept all the way to a global multinational, will approach us and say, I have this, I'm here, I'd like to be here. I don't have the science, the research, the data, the evidence, or the regulatory know-how to close that gap. So we built a platform across analytical, bioanalytical, clinical, and regulatory to fit all the pieces to get people commercialized, working hand in hand with either Health Canada, the FDA, EFSA, or TGA in Australia, which also covers New Zealand. And so it's very fascinating for our team of roughly 80 scientists, because one week they're dealing with a new ingredient for infant formula. The next week they're dealing with a dietary supplement that's now going the pharmaceutical route. To give you some more simplified context, what we found is from food to pharmaceutical and everything in between, the same model applies. You're here, you want to get there. And you either have a new product you want to launch, no matter where you are in the supply chain, either you're selling up or down the supply chain, or you're selling to a consumer. You have a new product you want to launch, or a current product you want to reposition or relaunch. That's really what it all boils down to on the services side for us, for our customers. And in order to do that, you have to let the FDA, Health Canada, and the EU know how it's made from a regulatory perspective, where it's made in terms of facilities and manufacturing process and technologies, who do you want to market to, and what do you want to say about it? So indication, patient population. And what are you allowed to say about it, and how aggressive can we be? It really boils down to that. And all of us on the business side of this equation are pushing that envelope every day. And to answer those questions can sometimes take as little as 30 days to 60 days and minimal budget, and sometimes it can take 7 to 8 years and far larger budgets. But ultimately, we're answering those questions for regulators. The other key thing for us is, just to give you a bit more context, and I always use this example, but if Pfizer were to approach us and say, we've got rights to a new molecular entity and synthetic in a lab, we would say, go talk to Quintiles. But if Pfizer showed up the next day and said, we want to add lutein to Centrum formula at this new dose for an ocular health claim, that's the type of thing we'd go in feet first and work with them and project manage and get all those pieces in place and get done for them. In terms of policy specifically, I'm not one typically to, at least on a national level, bash what NRC or CRA does, because we were heavily dependent on SHRED in the early years to get funded and reinvest and get going. So I'm a big fan of the SHRED program, as I'm sure many of you are. As a small to medium-sized enterprise, it's essential and very lucrative. We also made use of BioTalent and some of those funds as well. The other big one for us has been IRAP. And with IRAP, as many of you are aware, you start slowly, you get smaller, maybe recent grad grants, and then you move up to the medium and then larger size projects. And we have very close relationships with our CRA SHRED reviewers, sometimes too close. And we also have a very good relationship with our IRAP ITAs, because you get to the point where they're just people, and you get a good rapport with them, and they actually start giving you suggestions. That's always the key indicator for me with a government official, is when they actually start giving you helpful suggestions. Then I feel like we've got to the next level of relationship, which is important. So nationally, it's been great. On a provincial level, you may notice our name as Nutrasource Diagnostics, and we started the company around an omega-3 blood diagnostic, and we quickly became incredibly frustrated with diagnostic commercialization in the province of Ontario. To our knowledge, and perhaps this has changed, I'm not totally up to speed on this, but the last new diagnostic that OHIP picked up that medical doctors could requisition, I believe was from 1974, and that was vitamin D3 at the time. Many diagnostics have been delisted, and since then, the only new one is the HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which replaced the less sensitive CRP. Okay, great. There are 250 known risk factors for cardiovascular disease. OHIP tests for 5. So as an Ontarian, as a member of the public now, I go into my doctor's office, I get my medical done, I get a clean bill of health because I've passed these 5, and I'm a ticking time bomb for a cardiac event because I have terrible results on the other 245, but we're not talking about that. So in terms of selling through docs and getting OHIP coverage, I've found the Ontario environment in that specific area very frustrating. And so we actually got out of the diagnostic business altogether very early on. It's our legal name, but that's not what we call ourselves.
Your business model changed because of the roadblocks.
Tremendously. Complete pivot into other areas. But the sort of nutra to pharma or food to nutra to pharma pathways for companies globally, we have found as a niche service provider, that's been incredibly lucrative. So from our perspective, IRAP and Shred, BioTalent have all been very important to us and essential. One other quick note on the municipal city level, we've also found that at least in Guelph, Kitchener-Waterloo, Cambridge area, they're either funding entrepreneurs with just a concept or a researcher with just a concept, no sales plan, no marketing plan, nothing, or they're trying to attract, I'll use Pfizer again because I used them already, Pfizer to Guelph. And there's not really a lot of great programs in the middle for a small to medium enterprise.
That municipal piece is interesting, and maybe you guys can think about that, because maybe if we have time, we'll come back to the municipal piece as well. And you may find yourself writing a thank you letter to the Ontario government when you're a billion-dollar firm in your current business model for them steering you in that direction. So, yes. Anyway, we'll talk more about those roadblocks and how we might do things a little bit differently. Floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. I'm Har Grover. I'm Chair and CEO of Scientus Pharma. We are, this is a serious policy forum discussion, but I figured let's have some fun. Let's talk about cannabis. So we are a cannabis biotech company trying to make the transition from being an R&D company to a commercialization company. We've done it in a very short period of time. In our story, there's a number of key messages to get through and take away from a regulatory and policy point of view. It's uncharted territory in what we're in, and Canada is the market leader, and I'll tell you a little bit about why that's the case and where it potentially gets us. So the regulatory, but it's been creating a regulatory framework from scratch in a very short period of time. And it's affected our ability to do R&D and product innovation. It's going to affect reimbursement and other policy issues such as that. It certainly helps in terms of our ability to raise capital, attract talent. And the issues that we're facing right now are the need for coordination between federal and provincial regulatory and policy-making bodies. So let me tell you a little bit about our story and more importantly, the sector itself and how it impacts all of this. We're an early success story. We started the company about 4 years ago. We've grown from a lab at UHN in the Mars Center to now having a 45,000 square foot GMP compliant facility out in Whitby. We've grown from 3 co-founders of the company to now 40, and by summer of next year we're targeting to be around 100 employees. We've raised $30 million in capital, all private. We've not benefited from grant money. The reason is not that we couldn't attract it, the grant money was there, it's just that it goes so slowly and our sector is moving so fast that we don't have the time to secure those fundings. Shreds for sure we benefit from, so there are other things there, but we've benefited indirectly from our ability to raise capital because of the regulatory framework that's here in Canada compared to what it's like in the States, and in particular with the Jeff and Donald show that we have, where there's been a lot of difficulty for the American players to raise capital, and we've not had that. So in 4 short years, although we're an emerging company, we can legitimately lay claim to being probably the second leading company worldwide. There's a company called GW Pharma based out of the UK. They're way ahead of us. They've been around for 20 years. They've got a $3 billion market cap. So not trying to say that we're the same, but There's nobody that's at our stage of development. There's probably about 5 to 10 players that are nipping at our heels, but we're legitimately in second place. So how we've been able to do that, there's a lot of talk about the recreational market. That doesn't affect us, and the regulatory changes, that's where all the press is. But what gets lost in the mix is the ease that we've had in Canada to actually possess cannabis and have real scientists do real scientific work on cannabis, on the endocannabinoid system, which is implicated. There are more endocannabinoid receptors in the body than any other category. But you haven't had the ability to actually bring cannabis into the lab and do some legitimate work with it. We've been able to do that in Canada because we've got a regulatory framework that's allowed us to do that. In the United States, the American competitors that we have, they're working with synthetic versions of the cannabinoids. Just to go off on a little bit of a tangent, we believe that the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids will be a goldmine of drug discovery and development for the next 20, 30 years. But we're a ways away from developing NCE approaches to it. So right now we're working with natural extracts. And the Americans, though, are handcuffed. They can't bring in the natural extract to do novel formulations with that product. We've been able to do it, and therefore we've got a lead worldwide for that. Regulatory approval is very interesting. So, we think about Health Canada. It's got Therapeutic Products Division, Natural Health Products, a number of other directorates. 10 years ago, Health Canada started off the Office of Medical Cannabis. They don't operate through reviewing product dossiers to approve products. They work by setting policy or defining the product definition, and we've seen it go from a bag of weed, go and smoke it, to oils and capsules, and now novel formulations that we can come under without getting clinical trials. So that's our equivalent of fast-track approaches, whether it's for orphan diseases or bioequivalence types of approaches. So that's how we've been able to benefit from a very favorable regulatory environment here in Canada to achieve a high degree of success in a very short period of time.
Good. Thank you. Alok?
So I guess I represent a multinational, Bayer. It's about a 150-year-old company, but it's based on innovation. Everyone knows about aspirin. We invented artificial rubber. We invented polyurethanes, the stuff that goes in your insulation for fridges, amongst the first antibiotics that came out, the sulfonylureas. And subsequently, of course, we moved more into pharmaceutical and crop kind of discovery. So canola seeds, if you fly over from here to, say, Calgary, every second yellow field will probably be growing with our seeds of canola, which is, and it's subsequently sold off to China as an export market. And here we, as a company, innovation is the lifeblood of the company, because based on intellectual property, you have about 8 or 10 years to maximize an innovation that you've made, and then you got to go and search for the next big thing. And that striving for the next big thing or the next innovation is what really drives us across our various areas. Now, in the past, we were a very diversified company, but as markets become more discerning and challenging through transactions that by the end of, say, next year will be more than 200 billion euros, so about 300 billion Canadian dollars, we would have morphed from a diversified company into a company that focuses on human health through pharmaceuticals, through self-care, through our consumer health division, and on nutrition through our crop science division. Now, as a 150-year-old company, we are quite familiar with all jurisdictions. I think we operate in all countries except for maybe a few where laws would not allow us to operate, right? But as an example, I've lived in more than 7 countries. I've worked in more than, or I've run organizations in more than 27 countries. So we are as familiar with Boston, the Bay Area, Beijing, Berlin, Toronto. And that kind of colors our view on policy because we don't look at policy from a historical perspective. We look at it as a transverse perspective, right? Which, at today, which jurisdiction is the best for our next incremental dollar, right? It's a function of our history to a certain extent, but also a function of what is available. So Toronto gets compared to Boston, gets compared to Berlin, and the money could flow as easily in and out of it. In Canada, we have all three divisions. We have about $2 billion in sales. And in pharmaceuticals, we invest about 17% of sales in research and development here in Canada. And that does not take into account investments like the Blue Rock investment that was done, which is more of a special projects, just ongoing investments. And that kind of talks to the capabilities that are available in Canada, because that's a disproportionate amount of money being invested relative to 17, 1/7, yeah, for the last, say, 3 years on an average. Yeah? Now, in terms of looking at policy, so what really, it would be helpful to see how perhaps decisions get made where, with global companies who have access to all countries and capabilities across all countries. And the first one, of course, is the market attractiveness. The size of the market times the price point, let's put it that way, right? Is this a market that appreciates innovation and gives a fair trial to innovation itself, right? That's one aspect of market attractiveness. The second one, of course, for us is the institutions. Are they fair? Are they transparent? Are they evidence-based? Yeah, science-based institutions. And the third one, depending on the kind of project, you'd say, are there clusters of excellence? That means, is there an infrastructure here which will be able to do the same task a bit faster, maybe a bit cheaper, maybe with a bit better quality, than equally capable guys out in Boston, out in Stanford, out in Berlin, out in London, out in Tokyo, and all these capabilities, all these scientists are extremely smart, extremely charismatic, yeah, and have reasonably good infrastructure supporting them. So when you, and the last one, which also provides a bit of stability, is despite the changes in political cycles, every country has the 4-year political cycle, except for China, which has a 10-year political cycle, therefore there's more stability. The second level, the senior bureaucrats, right, they provide the stability in the direction to a very great extent. And are the policies in these countries progressive and forward-looking? While managing, you have to manage the short term, because if you don't manage the short term, you don't live to enjoy the long term, right? So they have to manage the short term, but they do have this view of, okay, where is this going? Where will this take us? So if you take, say, the Blue Rock example, which is a positive example, right? You had the McEwens, who were extremely visionary philanthropists, who, when there was a policy change in the US, decided to invest money or give money towards research in regenerative medicine. There were the scientists out at UHN who helped form the teams. There was the very, I think, strategic investment of the CCRM, which set a base for infrastructure. And then when the clouds cleared a bit, companies like us came in, yeah, for the second round of funding, say, with the money that takes you through, say, the second valley of death in product development, right? The first one is when you try it in animals. The second valley of death is when you go to humans, and that costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, and requires patience and, for lack of a better word, a steady hand, right? So that's one good example. Another good example would be the Population Health Research Institute just completed a study, a global study for us, with 27,000 patients, 1,600 centers around the globe. That's quite complex. It was run out of Hamilton. Again, very operationally smart team, very KPI driven, could get all items aligned quite fast, and they delivered the study actually earlier than anticipated. Operationally, it was running fast. It was earlier than anticipated because of very good results, right? So you have that. The challenge I see again, and I'm just repeating the themes here, I think is you have very good policies that accelerate innovation, but the challenge is in adoption of innovation within Canada per se. If you look at, say, growth of acceptance of new products, new categories of products across countries, you'd see that Canada is a bit behind the median also, yeah, which is a bit of a surprise in that sense. And the way I put it to my bosses, the Minister of Innovation is happy to see me as an opportunity. The Minister of Health is like, just stay away kind of thing, a bit of a risk, right? So that has to be balanced. And it's not that Canada is worse or better off. Every country is slightly different, and every country with socialized healthcare systems is challenged by this role. Yeah, it is not a uniquely Canadian problem. You don't have to look to other countries to find a solution. You would have to look at your issues, look at what pain points the country has, what balance you want, and decide on your strategy. I think that's the way I would look at it. Canadians love to beat up on themselves, it seems. So it's actually the healthcare system is phenomenally good. There are issues, nearly every country facing similar issues in healthcare, yeah, aging populations, home care, etc. And I feel, having looked and worked around the world, that this is one of the better systems, actually.
Thank you. I want to pick up in due course on the Blue Rock investment. That was like $250 million, so I think we want to pick apart that maybe a bit from a policy perspective. It'd also be great to tap into your international experience and what lessons you have for us from a policy perspective in Canada. I'm going to move now to the inhibitors and accelerators of from your experience, particularly I think the inhibitors, particularly the inhibitors, because I think we talked a little bit about accelerators already, and each of you did. Before I get there, though, is there a burning question in the audience? Is there something that has spurred some curiosity? Yes.
So many entrepreneurs in Canada complain that, we all know that a lot of companies don't grow, they sell early and stuff. You're a success. eSight as well. I met your CEO. How did you do it in a culture that's supposedly so naive and immature in entrepreneurship?
I think that's a great question, and I'm just going to broaden that a little bit because it was. I made a note here about particularly the Canadian startups' success, and how that occurred. What were the drivers that allowed you to be successful? There were, William, you talked about some of the inhibitors, but what were those drivers?
Couple of key things for us. One was every service we came up with was globally appealing, even though it may appeal or may be attached to commercialization in one specific market or jurisdiction. It was globally appealing to the customer base. Number two, and again, I find a lot of, with all due respect to scientists and engineers, they spend a lot of time chasing perfection, not realizing they have something they can sell. And I think, understand that we know how to sell something that's a B+, knowing that it's going to be an A or an A-, maybe a year from now or 2 years from now. We're not afraid to take that risk. And I think that has really helped us. We've been burned by that a couple of times, for sure. But overall, the other key aspect of this is, from a business perspective, you actually have to sell stuff. Being a business means you're selling stuff. And If you don't have that mindset, it's a hobby, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's science for science sake, and that's fun and can be very rewarding. But if you're in the business of science, you actually have to sell something, and you have to have people who are dedicated to, sticking their neck out and selling stuff.
William, what about from a policy perspective? So you mentioned SHRED was, don't put words in your mouth, but I think you characterize it as essential to your growth. Were there other things that, from a policy perspective, were accelerators?
Yes, when the Health Canada came out with the Natural Health Products Directorate, and all of a sudden there wasn't a home for companies like Jameson or Genuine Health, etc. They needed to get all these vitamins and omega-3s and probiotics were on the market, and very few of them had DINs that were grandfathered, and the ones that did have DINs were phased out. So this whole new licensing for this whole sector, and we said, of course we do this. And we launched our regulatory department the next day, and nobody was doing it. And we've done thousands of product license for companies all over the world, including Canadian ones, who want access to the Canadian market. So that's specific policy to our benefit, right? Yeah.
Mark, I want to just quickly make a link between your policy question and what Will said about businesses about selling stuff and what that scientists have to learn that. Innovation policy in Canada is still about R&D, and it has to change and be about customers and value creation.
Yes.
And I think that's a blockage in the policy world.
Yeah. Good point. Carly?
If I could add to that?
Sure. Yeah, please.
So I have a bit of a Rip Van Winkle effect in Canada because I was here 20 years ago and then I came back, right? And I remember 20 years ago, I was assistant to the guy, to my position. I was the assistant, and I would make all the statements and everything else. And I remember the competitiveness index at that time. Canada was in the top 5. When I came back, it was ranked 18. And a lot of that was because Canada seemed to have lost its global ability to commercialize internationally. Yeah, they had a nice word for it called brand building or something like that. But when you read the details, it's essentially global distribution. Yeah, and that is something that is a bit not seen as something that is sophisticated, but it provides a great degree of stability in the commercialization of product.
Okay, Carly, you're in 42 countries then. How did you do that?
So we have a great product that works really well, and it solves a need.
Yeah.
So I think that's, it's a simple way of saying it. And maybe a little bit of background. So the origin stories of eSight, a man named Conrad Lewis, serial entrepreneur, electrical engineer by training, has 2 sisters who have experienced Stargardt's. It's a degenerative macular degeneration disease, so a loss of their central vision. Imagine having your palm up against your nose and then trying to read a document. That's what it's like to have Stargardt's. Bluntest ways I can possibly try to understand it. And so through iteration after iteration, he with a team of friends that he was able to scrap together, they were able, and through access to research talent in Ottawa and then at the University of Waterloo and through NSERC funding and all sorts of other funds as they progressed and developed the prototype, which led to the next prototype, which led to the next prototype. Like eSight 1 apparently looked like a shoebox, a strap to somebody's head. It's not pretty. eSight 3 is a beautiful, beautiful device. People are proud to wear. It takes a lot to get somebody to walk around out in the world and we have something that identifies them as having a disability. You would not believe what it's like to walk down the street with a colleague wearing eSight, the amount of attention that they can attract. So it has to look good. It has to work in the way that you need it to. And the difference between eSight 2 compared to eSight 3, there's a reason why they're getting so much more buzz and excitement is because we listened to our clientele. We worked with them thoroughly to figure out, what do you actually need from this device? What are the challenges? What makes you decide not to bring eSight with you? When you introduce this to your family, what did they say about it? What do you like? What don't you like? And now we have this incredible technology that enables you to properly use it in a workplace and does all sorts of miraculous things. And you don't want to listen to me talk about it because I will go on. So I will stop, but I will be here later.
So I'll stop you, Carly. Yeah. So it was,
But that's why.
But is there? Are there specific government policies that helped you? I mean, there's no substitute for an awesome product and a huge unmet medical need.
Yeah, I think so. Support in those early days OCE, NSERC, IRAP, that funding helps you to get to a point. And then you have something cool that you can start to talk about. And so then you have the ability to attract investors. And once you attract a couple investors, then you can attract more. And so that's.
Har, what about you?
Yeah, so it's the Health Canada policy that has been driving the growth of our market. The fact that Health Canada 8 to 10 years ago created this Office of Medical Cannabis to specifically focus on this area. No other country's really done that. The fact that the product definition continues to expand and provides an alternative to get products to market sooner rather than later and bypass the $100 million that you're going to have to spend on clinical trials. I mean, that's been the big enabler. Alok talked a little bit about regenerative medicine, and I kind of equate the world of cannabis to where stem cells research was 20 years ago, and Canada did something similar at that time too. It had supportive policies for stem cell research, and that's what enabled the centers of excellence to develop that Alok mentions, in particular the McEwen Center at Mars, et cetera. I mean, centers like that. So our lab at Mars, we've got grant applications in to attract millions of dollars to create a center of excellence there as well. That doesn't happen in other countries. Germany and Australia are probably 2 or 3 years behind us, but Canada is so far in the lead right now. Israel is kind of there, but again, Canada is the global leader in this space, not only on the recreational side, but also on the medical side, where there's real science there.
Stem cells is an interesting example because the political situation in the States helped that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, any thoughts about the accelerators? We're going to talk about the inhibitors in a sec, but
Yes, so the accelerators, again, you're looking at a differential advantage. Yeah? You're looking at the small things that would make a difference. And for me, if the government wants to attract investment, in the cluster of competencies that is required for a technology to develop from product concept to commercialization, you have to realize which things are movable and which things are not, because the government of Ontario, for example, is bound by the land in Ontario, right? There's no point, there's little value of the government of Ontario opening something in LA, right? You want to open something in Ontario. So the idea would be which element in the chosen area of competence that you have can we build in Ontario which is not transferable. So for, say, a factory, for example, which is not easy to scale up in biologics, or anything that requires a kind of a difficult chemical process, right, which is expensive and difficult to move a second factory over. That kind of investment as a cornerstone of your infrastructure investment will naturally attract attention here, or will attract investment here. I'll give you an example. We have a hemophilia A product, cogenate, extremely biotech, extremely difficult to manufacture. And there are only about 12 experts around the world on the development and manufacturing of this product. Okay? So there was a plan to build 2 factories, one in Germany and one in China. And then we actually had to scale back, not because of resources, which were also a constraint, but because of capability. Right? So if you think about it, that's one area that they should look at. The second one is, of course, you have US attached to your hip. So you have to think of what strategic choice you make. A company like ours has more resources than theirs, but then they are much more sharper on their choice of strategy. Yeah. And that is the same thing you have to play here. You have to be driven, of course, your social policy is driven by social policy needs, but your economic policy could be driven, at least in some areas, by strategic choices where you say, we will be able to create a complete competitive advantage across the value chain in this segment or sector. And there are some good examples there.
So look, with the $250 million investment in Blue Rock, was there Was that related to government policy in any way, or is it in spite of government policy?
No,
Maybe
it was a
describe little
mix of just about everything, right?
Yeah, there
It was a mix of everything. There was the philanthropy that helped bring up the science. There were the scientists who were based here. The McEwen Center attracted some of the best scientists in the world. Gordon Keller, Michael LaFlamme. There was CCRM. So it was the mix of all of this that came together that attracted Bayer for cardiac research here, just for the cardiology component of Blue Rock.
Okay, we've been very positive now. Let's do the flip side. Unless there are burning questions. Jason. Jason has a limit of 2 questions for this panel.
So, Alok, I was really interested in one of your statements about the need for governments to manage short-term, but the need for that long-term vision and outlook, and that being very attractive. I guess one of my questions is, we heard in a panel earlier this morning with 2 assistant deputy ministers some positivity around life sciences as a priority, and Mark touched on that. But equally so, they discussed some of the constraints of government and separate mandates. So I guess my question is twofold. One is, do you see the province of Ontario, having a clear vision for where they want to go long term? And the flip side of that is, do you think that the connectivity between ministries or the lack thereof, or even at levels of government between provincial and federal, fall under that inhibitor or accelerator?
It's a leading question, but I'll allow it.
So the more stakeholders you have, the more complex your job, right? So I think politicians have very complex jobs. Senior bureaucrats have very complex jobs because they have to balance a number of stakeholders, right? Our number of stakeholders is a bit fewer. So we just have customers, regulators, shareholders, and employees. So it's a bit smaller. So our approaches become easier. In terms of Canada having a vision on a federal level and a provincial level in Ontario, I think there's a desire. There is a competitiveness to do it. But this vision is there in nearly every country. So I was down in Stanford. Stanford Hospital is investing $3 billion on the hospital. What is the core of their growth strategy and research strategy? Regenerative medicine, right? So it's having that vision, but being able to articulate a differential advantage that is concrete is the key thing, right? And at the same time, the connectivity is to be, you also have, while balancing, I mean, people say healthcare is free. No, it's not free in Canada. You pay for it through your taxes, right? So you pay for your tax, you pay your taxes. It's a higher tax burden than the US. And then you get free healthcare on the other side. So it's not that it's not free, and it's good that the government is, to a certain extent, not just spending money all over the place, right? Otherwise, we'd be borrowing from our kids, more or less, right? So, but nevertheless, it has to be an environment that is attractive for companies too. Because if you can't sell in a domestic market, that does become a challenge. And for international guys, if you can't sell in this market, why do any product development, right? And there are many aspects to this. The intellectual property, as the rights given to, say, all companies by society, more or less, is a bag of wheat which can run out of time. So inefficiencies in the system is actually stealing intellectual property, right? And if those can be cleared up, they also help because they bring benefit to patients earlier. They allow for adoption of innovation. And again, the important thing about innovation is most innovation creates value, especially with the institutional kind of buyers, would create value the time it is launched. Yeah? But after the patent dries out, the value triples or quadruples. Because now you can make the same, you can use the same intellectual property to make the product at a cheaper price, but the benefit is still the same. So after the intellectual property runs out, the benefits accrue to society forever. The costs for a shorter period of time. And that's the mindset you have to have while keeping costs in mind.
Harb, you've got a 45,000 square foot facility in Whitby. You're number 2 globally. Are there policies at the provincial level, or for that matter, any level that could have, if changed, put you at number 1 or put you farther ahead than where you are now, even though that you've clearly had some great success?
Yeah, I don't think that the number 2 versus number 1 issue would have made any difference, because that was driven by us. We just entered the market 4 years ago, didn't have the concept. And but you are talking about inhibitors, and there are some that we're now facing. So we're making the transition from R&D to commercialization. From an R&D point of view, the regulatory framework certainly helped us. Now that we're approaching commercialization, because of all of the attention towards the rec market, that is an impediment to us. So both at the federal and the provincial level, because there's such a tidal wave of interest in the rec market, the government's attention is solely focused on that. And McClellan came out and said, a few months ago in one of the roundtables, that we're just setting aside the medical framework for 5 years. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think it's helpful to our leadership position. So that's one. The other one, again, focus on the rec market. The provincials now, we've got the distribution system being set by the LCBO. That's not what we would like to see. We would have preferred to have seen the pharmacies as the preferred choice. We'll work within that, but those are impediments, and it's only because it's a double-edged sword. We benefited from Canada's leadership in the cannabis space. Now, though, because of that leadership, there's too much of a focus on the recreational market, and we're facing some challenges on that.
William, you're in 4 countries now, 100 employees. Is there something that, you talked about the woeful approval of new diagnostics. Are there things in your current business model that are slowing you from being even larger and more successful?
Some of them that were named earlier are some of the key ones earlier on in our company's history. I think that one of the areas on the CRO side that it's not a Canadian issue, it's a U.S. issue, but right now a lot of the ethics boards, if somebody with a natural ingredient who's looking to go the pharma pathway but want to go to medical food first, a specific designation and pathway in the U.S. market before they do the pharma route, a lot of the IRBs in the U.S. are treating supplement protocols, clinical trial protocols, as INDs, as investigational new drugs. So we're getting a lot of our field studies for our customers caught in ethics for an extended, what we feel is an extended unnecessary period of time. So there's a big convergence that's gone on with pharma and Nutra coming together, and pharmaceutical, a lot of M&A activity in the last 5 to 7 years with pharma buying out various nutraceutical outfits. And that's created a set of challenges, but also a set of opportunities. But that's one specific one currently where, and the FDA is very, very slow on making determinations and exemptions around that. So that's a current challenge, for sure.
All right. Carly, what about you? You're in 40 plus countries, 42 countries? So what's preventing you from being even more successful?
We're in 42 countries and counting, of course. So that meaning that we've overcome the regulatory hurdles. So that's, the degree of adoption and the presence there does not necessarily mean market domination, right? So I would say that, if I bring it back to some of the challenges that I alluded to initially, when you look at the population that eSight benefits and serves, this is a population that I think as a society, they're all in agreement that we should support them, and we do in a variety of ways. Someone who is low vision or legally blind has access to tools and supports from day one when they start school through university and college. We have grants to help people get into the workplace, and yet we know that they face barriers and challenges which result in a 70% unemployment rate. And so we have this patchwork of policies and programs and funds that you can cobble together and tally up, and over the course of a student's career might have multiple zeros, but they don't have the flexibility to choose how to spend or utilize those dollars. And so while the price of eSight is prohibitive today, it's also worth noting it's about 3/5 of the price of the last version, and the future version, of course, that's a trend will continue. But until there's direction to be more flexible in understanding what you can do with the funds made available to an individual and give them control over identifying, this is a tool for me, I want it. And you need that direction to come from the top, and you need it to then be administered at the bottom. And if I may allow one more minute, I promise, one story, because I think this illustrates it deeply. We had a 6-year-old girl come into the office yesterday. This is the one thing about working at eSight, is that you become a collector of people's stories. But 6-year-olds in the office are always really exciting because they put on the device and they are truly seeing the world through it's a brand new experience of experiencing the world. So about 5 minutes in, we hear this shriek. There is a door. She does have privacy, but she's there with grandma and grandpa and her parents, and we hear this shriek of joy, and she's laughing at her father's face because apparently it's hilarious. And then a couple minutes later, she's out exploring our offices, and it's a startup. So of course we have things like couches and whatnot, and lots of things for her to explore and see, and that sheer joy of it. But I'm brought over to have the conversation with the parents about, okay, so she would get this grant through the special education assistance, and we're accessing this, and they can list off all these things, and it patches up, and like, I know that their story is fair and it's legitimate and rational, and I don't have an answer that I'm happy with for them. And I think ultimately, I'm going to do what I can to work with them, to help them identify and to argue, to make the argument for accessing some of those funds and contributing towards it, but ultimately, we don't have the answer today, and we do need more direction. So it's not so much that we're saying adoption should be about brand new things that aren't on the radar right now. Sometimes it's just, let's reconfigure the way we spend. And when we only apply an OTAC style approach to technology assessment, while that is valid and important, and we have a responsibility to generate the data and outcomes too as a device manufacturer, that process will never capture the value of a 6-year-old learning math and reading, that there's a visual component to math and the access to the STEM STEM sector that she won't have, or she will have to fight tooth and nail to, if she can't learn that there's a visual component to math. So.
Very powerful. Thank you. We're quickly drawing to a close. I wanted to give another call to the audience for questions. I've got a question if nobody else does. So very quickly then, because we've got like a minute. So just a couple of words on what you would like from the audience in terms of their approach to policy. And we've talked about some of the accelerators, inhibitors. What do you want this audience to do as it pertains to policy when they leave this convention today?
Think about the people that you impact and stop looking, we all have the responsibility to stop looking at the page and how something applies and thinking about how else we could make something available, the impact we can have.
Yeah, I would 100% concur with that statement. Timing is everything, and time is of the essence, and approvals and moving things along is really key, getting them out to the market. They have to be safe, they have to be efficacious for sure, but there's a lot of policy that could occur to accelerate that process that's currently missing, that is available and established in other countries.
Luck matters. Because, so just as with stem cells 20 years ago, I don't think it was a planned strategy by any government organization to say, here we have an opportunity to be a center of excellence. We kind of fell into it. It's the same thing with cannabis. Luck matters, it's timing. We're at the forefront, but then once you're there, recognize that it's there and now start to create policies that continue that momentum as opposed to just abandoning it.
Advice for our audience?
I think it's been well said by the rest of the panelists. It's just about bringing products and services that improve human lives, right, in a safe and efficacious manner. And anything that helps that is beneficial.
Tremendous, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for this awesome panel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I've ran out of my last notebook. I've just ran out of. Now I need it.
Come and speak at LSO events more often.
Thank you all. So I have the job now to close the day, and I'm going to do a quick summary because I think there was a few key points that I jotted down throughout these sessions, and I just want to share with you some of these thoughts that have stuck with me throughout the day. As I said at the beginning of this, you know, for a policy geek such as myself, this is like Christmas, and I can tell you I was not disappointed in my gifts. Santa was very good to me. Our beginning panel with Sabina Steinkeller, Greg Wooten, and John Marshall, I have to tell you, I was really encouraged by the beginning of the day. I've spent part of my career, about a third of my career in government, and it is very exciting to see that there are fundamental changes and shifts in the culture within policymakers. And I find that that's very exciting because we talk about the policy of innovation, but now we're seeing innovation within policy. And I think that that is extremely exciting. And I feel re-energized by that shift. We heard that the Ontario government recognizes the opportunity that life sciences represents, and that there's a need for Ontario to be leaders. So I think that acknowledgement is very significant, and that there's a willingness within policymakers to implement change and become leaders and innovators themselves. In our Access to Capital panel, there was a term that was used, green shoots, that really struck me. And I think that this was a great visual of where we're at as a sector, and we heard it throughout the panels today. We've invested very heavily in research and science and commercialization, and we're starting to see the rewards. But we need to continue to develop these shoots and nurture them. And there was a lot of discussion around incentives and being thoughtful about how we incentivize companies and behaviors in terms of attracting capital and further achieving success, which will in turn beget success. Our keynote with Andre Picard was phenomenal, very insightful. I had a bit of a chuckle, actually, because he said something that I think anybody in the public service would probably smile internally at, and that was his description of when he hears opposing views, and usually the truth lands somewhere in the middle. When you're within government, you're always being approached by special interest groups, and knowing what is true, what is fact, and what is exaggeration is often really difficult. And I think that that led directly into the discussion around chief scientists and the role and the important role that they can play in bringing facts and evidence basis to policy and decision making. Mr. Picard also brought out a very interesting thing that I think is a challenge in my role at Life Sciences Ontario when I'm advocating for this industry, and that was the public perception in Canada that healthcare should be charitable and free and not profitable. And it's a viewpoint that publicly is embedded in our culture, but I think it's something that needs to change and shift. Part of that change and shift will be science literacy, which Maurice talked about so impassionately, and our panelists. I love the description of not just the policy of science, but the science of policy, and science being at the table. Very important. And then in our last panel here, we heard about the impacts that policy does have directly on the success of our businesses. And I was really inspired by the number of success stories that are here at the table today. And this idea of adoption of technology is something that we know government is looking at and have made steps towards, but there's still opportunity to do better. Policy from a global perspective, that's something that Alok talked about. It's not historical, it's competitive, and that there's a recognition of short-term versus long-term vision. And again, I think that that's another opportunity that we have in front of us. Finally, I'd like to finish by talking about patients. And on two of our panels today, we heard some terrific stories about the impact of life sciences technologies on end users and patients in particular. I find this really inspiring because as an advocate for this industry, I talk to many stakeholders throughout the life sciences, and it's a diverse industry. And whether it is the scientists that work for these companies, the executives that run these companies, people in business development roles, even administrators and HR people, whenever I ask the question of what gets you up in the morning, it always comes down to working for organizations that develop products and solutions that help people. It's the core at what we do. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what makes me enjoy this job so much. And I think we need to always keep that central to our focus. So I'm very enthusiastic about where we came full circle today with our platform document, our strategy, our blueprint that we've published. We've heard a lot of insights around that and support and validation of some of the pieces that we've put in there. And it will be a continued evolution. We are a growing industry, and we will continue to grow with it. Finally, I just have a quick housekeeping note. I don't know if I have a slide here on this, but we're finishing today with a networking reception. Okay, first of all, I'm going to thank my sponsors because that's the slide that came up, and my finger wag from my communications person here. I do want to thank all of our sponsors. We have been very fortunate this year. The support that we have received this year has been the best that we have ever seen. And it really speaks to this community growing and coming together and aligning behind some of these common challenges and visions. So our policy forum sponsors, our lead sponsor was Shift Health, City of Toronto, Egg Energy, BLG, obviously our host. Biotalent has been mentioned several times by some of our panelists and the work that they do. And the University of Toronto, Scarborough as well. Our panel sponsors have included Bayer, Merck, Celgene, Lilly, Alexion, and Sanofi Genzyme. And finally, our corporate sponsors, which support LSO activities throughout the year, are Scientus, Pharma, Innovative Medicines Canada, Sanofi, and the City of Brampton. Our platinum sponsors and our silver sponsors are Bond Consulting, E&Y, and Town of Richmond Hill. Please join me in thanking all of our sponsors. I'm going to stop touching that button because Brian's going to yell at me. So finally, we're going to wrap up with a cocktail. It's December 1st, so we can officially call this a holiday reception. They're going to open up the doors there in a moment. This reception is sponsored by University of Toronto Arts and Science Co-op. They have been a great supporter of our organization, and we've worked very closely with them. Their faculty does run a great co-op program. They have over 36 programs within the faculty, and they have co-ops that are available from 4, 8, 12 months. The process is extremely easy. They have a concierge service. And if you want to inquire about hiring somebody, and they take intake all year round, we have Miriam and Dave here. Miriam, stand up, wave. Miriam's right there. So go see Miriam if you want to hire a co-op student, a terrific co-op student from U of T. So with that, I want to thank you all, thank all of our panelists and speakers and your attention today, and let's enjoy a cocktail. Thank you.